Good morning, everybody. This is Sinofsky, and we're here with another edition of the A16 podcast. This time joining me, this is going to be a first for us, and we're hoping to have a lot of fun here, is Aaron Levie, the co-founder and CEO of Box. And we're here to talk about modern productivity and the transformation of IT. And we also really want to start off by talking about a white paper that the folks at Box just did called Mapping the Information Economy. And it's a tale of 5 industries. Fascinating white paper, and I think everybody should go and.
That was a sincere, fascinating that you just.
Yeah, no, you can't see there was no eye rolling, nothing.
Right,
it's actually, I looked at it, and what you guys did was so cool because you first, of course, everything was anonymous and private, and all the people involved knew that you were doing this, but you looked at how people were using Box, and across like some crazy number, 225,000 businesses, 25 million users. And 2.5 billion times quarterly they were interacting with content. It's a lot of data.
Yeah.
Like I think about the products that I designed, and we never had that kind of data. And I'm a guy who loves telemetry. So what did you learn in terms of being able to use that kind of data about how work is done in a modern way?
Yeah, so that's the numbers that you just cited are the sort of scale of our platform. And what we did was we zoomed into a few different industries and started to talk to clients that were using the products in different industries and tried to understand how does an enterprise use information in this new world. And it's really easy for us in Silicon Valley to sort of generically talk about enterprise software and how enterprises use their data. But actually by industry, you tend to see very, very different use cases and very different workflows around collaboration, around how data is consumed and worked with. So everything from financial services being sort of very top-down, very sort of closed networks and not sharing a lot of data, all the way out to sort of media and entertainment industry or software industry where there is a lot more collaboration, where there's a lot more sort of much flatter structures of how work gets
and internal and external too. Yeah,
internal and external, and we found surprises along the way. I think we think of the tech industry as being very mobile. Well, it turns out construction workers are actually far more mobile than those of us in the tech industry. So there's a lot of interesting ways that data is consumed and worked with in the enterprise that we were able to discover. And I think what we also found was a lot of enterprises are still going through this process of reimagining what their workforce is going to look like in the future, and what are the software tools and platforms that they're going to need to actually accomplish the business outcomes that they're looking for. And that's going to be a radically different set of tools than what they maybe used 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that in a way that's sort of the most fascinating thing is it forces all of us when you see a paper like this, and we get so enmeshed in the software world, like just what it's like. We're all software people. Most of the people listening work very closely in the software industry. The interesting thing is we do get so wrapped up in that industry that we forget that other industries have a whole different timeline. And actually, it's not really just their resistance or seeking out of change. It's just that they have different priorities.
Yep.
Like if you were running a car company 25 years ago, like IT was not like the most important thing on your mind. Like you would hire people and it would be an important function, but so was finance and human resources. But you were like, supply chain is everything. Or if, whatever industry you were in, like software wasn't quite the most important thing. And now we're seeing, like, in fact, the way that I used to talk about it was like you could go to Detroit and you could see these 3 car companies. And basically, we used to think what really differentiated them was, how they did software inside, like the tools. And of course, they all ended up with kind of a similar set of tools.
Right.
And then the incremental difference over who had 99.9% uptime of running their email and 99.99% time, and the resources that they devoted to that extra 9 just to run the same software.
You basically differentiated if you could deploy SAP better than the next guy.
Right, and keep it running.
Yep.
And so in the world of SaaS, like that whole thing just completely changes. And you've obviously been talking to a bunch of customers all the time, but you just got back and you've been going through a bunch of different kind of industries. What are you really seeing about this whole, this kind of dramatic shift in focus of a CEO level person?
Yeah, well, so it's pretty interesting. So if you connect the evolution of software and technology with just literally the evolution of the economy and I think what we would consider the core economic drivers of the U.S. and the globe, they actually map very closely. And I think you've pointed this out kind of over the years, where if you go back 20 or 30 years, we were in an industrial economy, and that meant that scale mattered more than anything. That meant economies of scale mattered more than anything. That meant that you had to centralize as many resources as possible to get efficiency from those resources. You wanted as much standardization and as few defects as possible. That applied to the products that you built, but that also applied to the technology that you built up to power your organization. And so, to the Detroit example, if you were in IT, the job was to build scale in your data center and in your operations, and run your ERP better or at least as good as the next automaker in your field. And that was how you competed. And all of a sudden, just in a 3, 5, 7 year period, we have infinite computing from Amazon. Everyone has a device both in their pocket, in their bag, at their home, and so you have the infinite ability to get access to information and to work on new platforms. You have a whole new set of consumer technologies that we're using, and there's also a new demographic entering the workforce that was literally born with the internet. So when you combine all of those things, the industrial age IT model starts to break down, where if you're spending all of your time building better uptime of your ERP system, when actually the way that people are working is so radically different because they're more distributed, they're more mobile, they have to collaborate more, then you're not really going to be able to produce competitive advantage in this sort of more information age that we've moved to. And so what we're finding with customers and large enterprises is that recognition is now becoming more and more apparent, and it's requiring and forcing a new delivery of IT, where you go from this world where again, if you had 10,000 CPUs, that was your competitive advantage. Well, now you can just buy those 10,000 CPUs on demand from Amazon, and you're probably better off letting Amazon, Microsoft, Google all compete for your dollars than you going and building them out yourself. And then by the time you deploy them, another Moore's Law cycle has already occurred, and you've lost half of your investment. So that's the big shift, and the implications are massive on the IT side. They're driving a whole new wave of, I think, software as a service companies and startups to build for this new economy and new way of working. And it has massive implications on the businesses themselves. And when you go, east of Fremont, I think the thinking around, digitization is still something that needs to happen in a much broader way. And that's going to relate to both, the upside of digitization and IT, as well as the downside of the internet and all the new risks that are out there that CEOs and leaders have to pay attention to.
Yeah, don't you think what I think is so interesting about what you said is how it shifts the focus of IT, you said, from systems to users. It also allows IT to focus much less on the deployment and management and scale and reliability and security, which of course the idea of competing with the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts on security, if you're an appliance maker in the Midwest, that's where are you going to hire those people? How could you possibly compete? But also the focus instead on what IT's role is with just information itself within a company, and how do they really think about the role of information? Because if they think about it strategically, they could go, wow, we have all of our employees. What they're doing is creating, collaborating, and sharing our own intellectual property and our own competitive advantage. And what's the right way to really interact? Because of course, what they learned was over the past 10 years or so with this new demographic, if they don't pay attention and they make it harder for people to use that system that they put in place in the industrial age, then people are just going to ignore it, and all of a sudden corporate assets are flying around on Gmail, they're collaborating with their partners using ad hoc tools. And so I think that's what's so interesting about the white paper, about the SaaS model, and just about the way that IT can really participate in an up-leveled and much more value-added sort of way.
Yeah, the kind of two things to pull from that. So on the first part of what you're saying, we were just at a major kind of top 10 pharma and life sciences company in the Midwest, and we're meeting with the CIO and the VP of infrastructure, and they're obviously already biased toward this direction. They're a Box customer. They're excited about the kind of future of the cloud, and the VP of infrastructure has a sign in his office that says "No infrastructure." So that is where things are going, where his job is not to build out data centers and be someone that understands the power consumption and CPU utilization and the operational side of infrastructure. His job is to go get the best-in-class cloud providers that are going to produce the kind of scale that he needs for the operations that he's doing, and not actually be in the hardware business. And that's a pretty dramatic shift if you think about that role and even the role broadly of the IT organization. And it's interesting because a lot of what we tend to do in Silicon Valley is sort of take things to the immediate logical conclusion, but not necessarily the derivative after that. So our immediate logical conclusion is, well, if everything's delivered as a service, then there's no jobs in IT anymore. But that's a little bit myopic because that's not thinking about what are then the next stage of things that the VP of infrastructure and the CIO of a company that is going to be more information driven.
Right.
What are they going to be doing in the future? And the future is going to be, we were talking to one customer, imagine a world where once you have your infrastructure delivered for free, and once you have this new baseline of platforms, maybe it's Workday for human capital management, maybe it's Zendesk for customer support, maybe it's Gmail or Office 365 for email, we're obviously hoping it's Box for content management. That's the new baseline. Now imagine a world where you have APIs into your information in every single one of those platforms. And the new role of IT is to think about, well, I have all of this information that is in the form of intellectual property and assets that I can now go produce N number of new use cases around that weren't possible before. And so you start to think about your information as not something that just people are transacting on, but actually as the assets of your business, which then means that the CIO and their organization should be thinking of, well, how can we better use that information? Some cases it'll be big data. If you're in the appliance or industrial business, then you're producing a lot of data with the telemetry you now have. In other cases, if it's a more knowledge worker driven business, like a consulting firm, then every project you do is producing IP. In both of those cases, someone and some organization needs to be responsible for producing better productivity and better results because of that information.
That's super cool, because one of the things that I think is so interesting about this transition from the industrial age, if you look at the white paper and you see the different kind of segments of usage, one of the things that jumps out for me is that the industrial age view of things was, okay, you're in a certain segment like FinServ or pharma, and so your uses are different. So then you go, well, we need content management for our vertical. And then in the industrial age, that meant somebody was going to go and build a vertical solution for you, which then would try to jam all of the company's assets into this one vertical approach. But consistently over the years, those would get relegated off to the side, and then they can't get updated because they're hard, they're big, they're heavy, they're expensive. Then each of the companies that provides that is dealing with customers at different points in a life cycle and all of that complexity. And so what kept happening is that they would build up these very fragile, sort of like Jengas of software, and then people would just go and use file shares, or they would go and use email attachments or things like that. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about what you said about APIs is you can take something like a Box, and people can use it in a broad and horizontal way that works on their phones, that works with partners, works with customers. You overlay the administrative controls. But then that next level of IT, that information management, comes from building unique applications for your organization that can truly be a competitive advantage, because they let you think differently about how you're going to use that information, whether it's mining the information or sharing it or collaborating or reusing it or finding it. And so you have all these cool APIs that are a very different level.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't think we've thought about this before, but the
just so right now, this is like a new feature.
This is a live idea happening.
Okay, we are at the whiteboard now, specking out the next iteration of Box.
This is the future of the cloud right now, what we're about to say. So it is interesting. So maybe the way to think about it is, for the first 30 or 40 years of IT, right, most of our time was spent on just getting the input to work. Like all of the infrastructure, all of the software, all of the technology, just to even get the data. Now that is trivial because of software as a service, because of mobile, because of these platforms. So getting the data has become, orders of magnitude easier. And so the next job is really, what do you do with it? And so now all of the time should begin to shift to, once I have simpler platforms that give me, comprehensive and authoritative information, what do I do to create value on top of that? And so, maybe the next era really is just about, what is it that you're doing with your information, as opposed to how are you getting your information?
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting is that if we just took a step back, like most evolutions of information technology ends up taking this sort of path. Like for a long time, IT was all about infrastructure, just like getting all the computers on a network.
Yep.
Or then first getting all the computers in there, then getting them all on a network. And then what happens is these resources, they peak and then they sort of recede. And so what we're seeing right now is, and your recent tour through a bunch of customers sort of confirms that like even at what we in Silicon Valley would call the most staid industries of the world are starting to really see this whole world change in terms of where that goes.
It's actually really exciting because the thing is we tend to we tend to see the early adopters in the Valley, and we sort of say, well, why can't just everybody adopt this fast? And it's because like they're running the businesses that produce our drugs, that keep our highways safe, that allow us to actually have like a refrigerator that works, and that's where they spend all their time. And so they don't want to dramatically rip out all of the systems that they've built up over the years. And what's exciting though is that everyone is recognizing that there are going to be areas that change. It's not that every single process and piece of software and piece of infrastructure has to move to the cloud or become mobile. It's that there's a net new area of work that's happening or opportunity that will align to more of these principles. And I think we finally have CIOs, which is important for the Valley because that means that the budget is there, who realize that this is where things are going. And it's actually a pretty exciting time if you are in one of these blue chip businesses and understand this, because the potential of combining these two worlds is incredibly exciting. As a small example, we were with a manufacturer of sort of signals and sensors in the municipal and sort of safety space. And this is a company that's been around for over 100 years. They make the sirens and the lights and a lot of the equipment to figure out where traffic's flowing. And if you just think about like that is the device that will be the industrial internet and the Internet of Things device more than something around our wrist. Like the ability to wire up the world with better telemetry and better information. And this is a business that has been there for over 100 years, and they got really good at building these things, and now they have a CIO and a head of innovation that realizes that they can do exactly what GE just did on jet engines and bring that to completely other areas and processes of the world. So I think leaders are getting this. I think that there's a probably maybe an emerging and still early amount of probably education and curriculum and ways to think about these things, but I think you can start to see the examples of what the world might look like in 10 or 20 years.
Cool. Well, thanks, Aaron. There's been Aaron Levie and Stephen here with another a16z podcast on SaaS and sort of the changing workplace and the information economy. Thank you.
Thank you.